My husband and his father lived off me for 4 years, spending over $150,000. When I refused to give him $3,000 for a car, he pushed me down the stairs. But I called the sheriff, kicked them out of my house, and sued. Now they're homeless, and I got my life back. I'm 32 years old. I work in accounting for a mid-sized firm in the city. And honestly, I need to tell this story because for 4 years I lived in a situation that every time I think about it, I can't believe I put up with it for so long. The thing is, I met Michael when I was 24. He was 27. And at first, everything seemed normal. You know, we fell in love. We went out. It was fun and sweet and all those things you expect when you start a relationship. He moved in with me a year into dating, to my apartment that I had bought with my savings and a loan I had taken out on my own, and things were still good at that point. I mean, he worked in construction, and although he didn't make as much as I did, at least he contributed something, and I didn't mind paying a bit more because, well, we were building a life together. Or so I thought. We got married when we'd been together for 2 years. Nothing too elaborate, just a small ceremony with close friends and family. And that's where everything started to change, although I didn't see it coming at all. About 6 months after we got married, Michael's father, Thomas, who was like 58 years old at the time, lost his job at a factory where he'd worked for years. And Michael told me that his dad needed temporary help if he could stay with us just a few months until he found something new. I said yes because, honestly, I thought it was the right thing to do. Like, he's my husband's family and you have to support during difficult times, right? But those few months turned into a year, and that year turned into 4 full years where I basically became the personal bank for both of them. At first, Thomas at least pretended to look for work. He'd go out in the mornings with the newspaper, marking job offers and stuff like that. But after about 6 months, he simply stopped trying. He settled into my house, in the guest room that I had converted into an office, and started acting like I owed him something for existing. Michael didn't help at all either because about a year after his dad moved in with us, he also lost his job. Something about cutbacks at the construction company where he was, and instead of looking for something new right away, he decided he was also going to take a break. A break that never ended, basically. And there I was, at 28 years old, paying the mortgage on my house, all the utilities, food, cable, internet, car insurance, everything, literally everything, while these 2 grown men spent their time watching TV and asking me for money as if I were an ATM. The worst part wasn't just that they didn't work, the worst part was the attitude. Thomas especially became increasingly demanding and aggressive over time. He'd ask me for money for cigarettes, for beer, to go out with his friends, and if I told him no or that I didn't have extra that month, he'd get furious and start yelling at me that I was selfish, that family supports each other, that how was it possible that being the one who earned more I didn't want to share with them. And Michael, never. And when I say never, I mean never. Defended me not even once. He'd just stay quiet watching TV or go to another room when his father started with his tantrums. I tried to talk to Michael so many times, like I'd tell him he needed to look for work, that his dad also had to contribute something, that this couldn't continue like this because I was exhausting myself financially and emotionally. But he always came out with his dad was going through a tough time, that I didn't understand how hard it was for a man his age to find work, to give him more time. 4 years later, nothing had changed except that I was completely burned out. I'd do the mental math every month and it was depressing, you know, like between the mortgage, which was about $1,200, plus utilities, which were another $300, plus food, which was easily $600, because these 2 ate like there was no tomorrow, plus gas, plus insurance, plus everything. I was easily spending like $4,000 a month just keeping the house afloat, and these 2 people who contributed absolutely nothing. I had stopped going out with my friends because I didn't have extra money for that. I had canceled my gym membership. I didn't even buy myself new clothes anymore. Nothing. All my salary went to maintaining them, and I barely had anything left for myself. And on top of that, Thomas had the nerve to complain if I bought a different brand of beer or if dinner wasn't what he wanted. It was surreal. Completely surreal. Everything exploded about 6 months ago. Thomas came to my room on a Saturday morning. I was there working on my laptop because I had to finish some reports for Monday, and he came in without knocking like he always did, stood in front of me with his arms crossed and told me he needed $3,000. Just like that. Like nothing. I asked him what for, and he said he'd seen a car he wanted to buy. a used Chevy from 2015 or something like that, and that I needed the money for the down payment. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing, and told him no, that I definitely didn't have $3,000 extra to give him for a car when he didn't even work or have a valid license because he'd lost it due to unpaid tickets. He turned red, literally red with rage, and started yelling at me that I was ungrateful, that he had raised the man I was married to, that I owed him respect and consideration, that how dare I deny him something when I had a stable job and they didn't. I told him, and I said it calmly at first, that I had been supporting both of them for 4 years, that I had probably spent over $150,000 on them in that time, and that I didn't owe them anything more, and that I definitely wasn't going to give him $3,000 for a car he didn't need. That's when things got really ugly. Thomas started yelling at me louder, saying horrible things like I was a selfish bitch, that Michael had made a mistake marrying me, that I didn't understand what real family was. I got up from the bed and told him to get out of my room, that this was my house, and I wasn't going to allow him to talk to me like that. I walked to the door to open it so he'd leave, and he followed me yelling, getting closer and closer to me, and when I got to the door and turned around to tell him again to leave, he pushed me. He pushed me hard, with both hands on my shoulders, and I was right at the landing of the stairs. I completely lost my balance and fell, rolling down the stairs. It was like 10 steps, but it felt like 1,000. I hit my shoulder against the wall, my hip against the steps, my head against the railing, and ended up on the floor of the entrance, unable to breathe well from the pain and shock. I couldn't believe that had just happened. Like my brain wasn't processing that this man had just thrown me down the stairs. I stayed there on the floor for what seemed like forever, but was probably just a few seconds. And the next thing I heard was Thomas coming down the stairs yelling that it was my fault for provoking him, that I had made him angry, that if I were more reasonable, none of that would have happened. Michael appeared from the living room where he'd been watching television, saw his father standing there yelling and me on the floor clearly hurt, and you know what he did? Nothing. Well, no, not nothing exactly. He asked his dad what had happened. Thomas told him I had tripped on my own after being disrespectful to him. And Michael looked at me and asked if I was okay, but with a tone so cold and distant, as if he were asking a stranger, not his wife. I told him his father had pushed me, that he'd thrown me down the stairs, and he just shook his head and said something like it must have been an accident, that his dad wouldn't do something like that on purpose, that I was exaggerating. He helped me up, but in an almost mechanical way, without any real emotion. And when I told him my shoulder hurt, horribly, and I probably needed to go to the hospital, he told me to take an ibuprofen and lie down. Something broke inside me there. Something that has no repair. I realized in that moment, lying on the floor in pain all over my body, while my husband defended the man who had just physically assaulted me, that I meant nothing to him, that I had never meant anything more than a source of income, that the 4 years I had spent supporting them, sacrificing my financial stability and my peace of mind, hadn't generated even a gram of loyalty or affection or even basic respect from him. I got up as best I could, ignored the pain, went up to my room, locked the door, and started packing my most important things in a suitcase. I could hear Thomas downstairs still yelling things about how disrespectful I was, and Michael telling him to calm down, but I didn't hear Michael defend me or tell his father what he'd done was wrong even once. I packed clothes for about a week, grabbed my important documents that I had in a safe box in my closet, my laptop, my toiletries, and left that room without looking back. I went down the stairs, now very carefully because everything hurt, and walked straight to the front door. Michael saw me with the suitcase and asked me where I was going, and I just told him I was leaving, that I wasn't going to spend one more second in that house. Thomas yelled something about it being my obligation to stay, that I couldn't just leave like that, and I didn't even turn to look at him. I left, got in my car, which was a 2019 Honda Accord that I had also paid for, alone obviously, and drove away. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I had to get out of there before I did or said something I'd regret later. I ended up at a motel about 20 minutes from the house, one of those cheap roadside motels that cost $60 a night, and I checked in for a week while I figured out what I was going to do. That night, I examined my body and I had bruises everywhere. My shoulder especially was purple and swollen, and my hip was also horrible. I took pictures of everything with my phone. I don't know exactly why at that moment, but something told me I was going to need evidence of what had happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. I spent it staring at the ceiling thinking about how I had gotten to this point, how I had allowed myself to be treated like that for so long, why I had endured so much. The next morning, Sunday, I called Jennifer, a friend from college who had become a lawyer and who I knew did family and civil law. I told her everything. Absolutely everything. From the beginning with Thomas moving in supposedly temporarily, going through the 4 years of supporting them without them contributing anything, to what had happened the day before. Jennifer was quiet for a moment after I finished talking, and then she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Sarah, what they did to you is financial abuse, and what happened yesterday is physical assault, and you don't have to keep tolerating any of that." She told me to come see her at her office Monday morning to bring all the documentation I could get, and that we were going to fix this legally. Monday, I arrived at her office with a box full of papers. I had printed my bank statements from the last 4 years, where you could clearly see that I was the only one depositing money and paying all the bills. I had receipts for the mortgage, for utilities, for grocery shopping, everything in my name, everything paid by me. I also had the photos of my bruises and had written a detailed document of everything that had happened on Saturday. Jennifer carefully reviewed everything, taking notes, and after about an hour, she explained my options. She told me the house was in my name only, that Michael had never been added to the deed, so I had every legal right to kick them out. She explained that we could initiate a formal eviction process, and that we could also sue Thomas for assault and seek damages for the financial abuse that had lasted years. I said yes to everything. I wanted them out of my house, and I wanted Thomas to face legal consequences for what he'd done to me. Jennifer prepared the eviction documents that same week, and also the civil lawsuit against Thomas. I meanwhile started looking for a new apartment for myself, because honestly I didn't want to go back to living in that house where I'd spent the worst years of my life, even though it was legally mine. I found a nice apartment in another part of the city, smaller than the house but perfect for me alone. And I signed the rental contract for 6 months, while I decided what to do with the house long term. During that week I was at the motel. Michael called me about 20 times and sent me I don't know how many text messages. The first messages were almost aggressive, like telling me I was being ridiculous, that I had to come back home, that his dad was very stressed, because of me. But when I didn't respond to any of those, the messages changed to be more manipulative, like he missed me, that we could talk things through, that his dad was willing to apologize. Never. Not once in all those messages. Did he ask me how I was? If anything hurt? If I needed anything? It was all about them and their needs. I saved all those messages too, because Jennifer told me everything could serve as evidence. Friday of that week, a week after I left, I went to the house when I knew both of them were going to be there. But I didn't go alone. I hired a moving company and went with 2 big guys to get the rest of my things. I had let Jennifer know what I was going to do, and she told me it was fine, that it was my house and I had the right to enter, but to go with witnesses just in case. Michael and Thomas were in the living room when we entered, and they were completely surprised. Michael got up and asked me what I was doing, and I told him as calmly as I could that I was taking my belongings. Thomas started yelling that I couldn't do that this was his house now too, and I just completely ignored him and indicated to the movers which things were mine. We took my bed, my desk, my clothes, my books, my pictures, my plates and kitchen utensils that I had bought, basically everything that was mine. I left them with the old furniture they had brought and the basics so they could function, but I took everything that had sentimental or monetary value to me. The move took about 3 hours, and during all that time Thomas wouldn't stop yelling horrible things at me while Michael just stood there doing nothing as always. When we finished and the movers were loading the last boxes onto the truck, Michael grabbed my arm, not hard but enough to stop me, and told me he couldn't believe I was doing this to him, that we were family. And I, honestly, laughed without humor, and told him that family was what they had stopped being a long time ago. That family supports each other and doesn't abuse just one person, and to expect the eviction papers that would arrive soon. The documents arrived the following Monday. Jennifer had managed to get a court officer to deliver them personally so they couldn't say they hadn't received them. The eviction gave them 30 days to vacate the property, and the civil lawsuit against Thomas detailed the physical assault and sought compensation for damages. Michael called me immediately after receiving the papers. He was hysterical, yelling about how I could do this to them, that they had nowhere to go, that his dad didn't have money to rent another place. I told him that wasn't my problem, that they'd had 4 years to get organized and get jobs and contribute to the house but had chosen to take advantage of me, and that now they'd face the consequences of those decisions. He tried to make me feel guilty, saying that I was his wife, and wives were supposed to support their husbands in good times and bad. And I told him that support was mutual, and he had never supported me in anything, and I hung up the call. The 30 days were a nightmare of constant harassment. Michael and Thomas called me at all hours, sent me messages. They even went to my workplace one day, but security didn't let them up to my floor after I warned them I didn't want to see them. Thomas sent me a particularly horrible message where he told me I was going to regret having betrayed them like this. That family was everything, and I had chosen money over them. That I was going to end up alone and miserable. I saved that message too and sent it to Jennifer. The 30 days were up, and they hadn't moved from the house. Jennifer had anticipated this and already had the documents ready for the sheriff to go enforce the eviction by force. The day the sheriff went to the house, I went too, but stayed in my car at a safe distance. Jennifer had gone with me and had also hired another moving officer in case we needed to put their stuff out on the street. The sheriff knocked on the door. Thomas opened it, and he explained he had an eviction order that had to be fulfilled immediately. Thomas literally tore up the papers in front of the sheriff and told him he wasn't going anywhere, that this house belonged to his son and he had a right to be there. The sheriff explained that the house was legally in my name, that the eviction period had expired, and that if he didn't leave voluntarily, he'd have to remove him by force and he could face additional charges for contempt. Thomas kept yelling and refusing, and the sheriff called 2 more backup officers. The 3 of them entered the house and told Thomas and Michael they had 1 hour to pack the essentials and leave, or they were going to put their stuff on the street and they were going to be arrested. That finally made them react. I watched from the car as they came out with garbage bags full of clothes and poorly packed boxes, throwing everything in the trunk and back seat of an old car that apparently Thomas had gotten from somewhere, probably borrowed from some friend. Michael, at one point, walked toward my car, and I rolled down the window just a little. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and something that could have been pain, and told me, "This isn't what family does." And I responded, "Exactly. Family doesn't financially abuse one of their own for years or allow them to be physically assaulted, so I guess you and your father taught me well what family is not." They left. I watched the car drive away down the street and I felt something strange. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it wasn't sadness either. It was more like enormous relief mixed with some disbelief that it had really happened. Jennifer told me I could enter the house now, that it was safe. We went in together, and the place was a mess. They had left trash everywhere, dirty dishes in the sink, stains on the walls, but I didn't care, because it was finally just mine. Again. I hired a cleaning company for the next day, and also called a locksmith, to change all the locks immediately. I didn't want even the slightest possibility of them coming back. The following weeks I spent cleaning the house and basically recovering my life. I went out with my friends again, something I hadn't done in years, and when I told them everything that had happened, they were horrified. Several told me they had noticed I looked increasingly tired and stressed, but didn't know what was really happening, because I had never wanted to talk much about it. I realized I had been isolating myself without realizing it, probably out of shame to admit I was in that situation. I started therapy too, because Jennifer recommended I talk to someone about everything I'd lived through, and she was right. I needed to process 4 years of emotional and financial abuse, in addition to the physical assault. And the civil case against Thomas moved forward, and we had to go to court about 3 months later. I presented all my evidence, the bank statements, the photos of the bruises, the threatening text messages he'd sent me, the sheriff's testimony about how he'd resisted the eviction. Thomas tried to argue that everything had been a big misunderstanding, that I was exaggerating, that he had only touched me lightly, and I had tripped on my own. But the evidence was too clear. The judge ruled in my favor and ordered Thomas to pay $25,000 in damages, which we all knew he probably was never going to pay because he had no money or job, but at least what he'd done was legally recorded. Michael contacted me one last time about a month after court. He sent me a long message explaining he had separated from his father because supposedly he had realized what had happened was wrong, and he asked me if we could try to fix our marriage. I responded after thinking about it for several days and told him no, that what we'd had ended a long time ago, that the man I had met years ago either never really existed or had completely disappeared, and that I needed to move forward without him. I initiated divorce proceedings the following week. Michael didn't fight anything. He signed all the papers without objection, probably because he knew legally he had no right to anything I had worked to get. I eventually decided to sell the house. Although I had recovered and cleaned it, I could never feel comfortable there again after everything that had happened. Every corner had some negative memory associated with it, and I wanted to start completely fresh. I put it on the market about 2 months ago and sold it pretty quickly. I got a good profit considering I had paid the mortgage for years, and with that money, I was able to buy a smaller, but beautiful apartment in a new building, in an area I had always liked. It's a large studio with huge windows facing the city, and it's completely mine, paid completely with my money, my effort, my work. I've been focusing on myself these last few months. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and reading. I enrolled in yoga classes. I'm going out more with my friends. I even went on a date recently, although nothing serious yet. Work is going incredibly well too. In fact, they offered me a promotion 3 weeks ago that I accepted. It comes with a considerable raise and more responsibilities, but I'm excited. My therapist says I'm making excellent progress, that I'm learning to set healthy boundaries and recognize my own worth, things I clearly didn't have well established before. Sometimes the guilt still gets me. I'm not going to lie. I think about Michael living, who knows where, probably still without a job, and a part of me feels bad about how things ended. But then I remind myself that I didn't cause any of this, that I spent 4 years trying to make it work, sacrificing my financial stability and my peace of mind, and that the only reason it ended like this was because they chose to take advantage of me, again and again until I finally stood up for myself. I have nothing to feel guilty about. I did what I had to do to protect myself and get my life back. Last week, I went to a coffee shop near my new apartment. I was reading a book quietly with my coffee, and I realized I was genuinely happy. Like that kind of calm and stable happiness I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't worried about how much money I had left after paying all the bills. I wasn't stressed about getting home and facing irrational demands or toxic environments. I was just there, at peace, enjoying my coffee and my book on a Sunday afternoon. And that such simple feeling, made me realize I did the right thing. I realized that freedom and peace of mind are worth infinitely more than any misunderstood obligation toward people who never really valued you.